All right, it is Wednesday, November the 28th, and welcome to week number four of Introduction to Corrections. My name is Richard Wright, as you all know, and I'm going to take a few minutes and I'm going to share with you some information concerning the assignments for the week. I graded the assignments for week 2 already, and we'll be working on week 3 um, in the next day or so. I also want to point out to many of you that, excuse me, that you did pretty good with the following the providing credible sources. Just make sure that you don't just throw one source in. And then make sure that if you have to provide examples, provide more than one example, because one of the key things that's important is to demonstrate that you're doing some research, and don't use the textbook as the sources as much as minimize it, and make sure you have sources in the body of the paper and references at the end, and then a cover page. And so it's very important that you follow what is said in the rubric. As I said, stay to the right as far as to the left. A few of you have had really good papers, but you didn't get the content in with any credible sources. Um, remember what we're doing. We're training you to cite your sources. I said that from day one, and it is very, 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 very important that you do that. So, all right. So let's get right into sharing my screen. Okay. So let's come down here. As you can see, we have tonight's lecture, and then one more lecture. That will be next week, the 4th. That will be the last lecture. We will not have a lecture week 6. And so here are the 3 previously recorded lectures. Week 1, open house. Week 2, week 3, and then tonight, week 4 will be under here. Let's look at the course calendar real quick. As you can see, this is where we are. Today is the 28th. Monday, I gave out the reading assignment as well as the PowerPoints that you have. Your initial post on intermediate sanctions was due yesterday. Your reply post is due the 31st, Halloween. And then finally, the 1st, your written assignment, probation officer, is due, along with your quiz, which you guys are all familiar with how that works now. 3 choices out of it. And then finally, your live classroom lecture. So, all right. One of the things about this class that all students should be aware of, and I'm on top of it, paying close attention, is that there is not a lot of work in this class. This is the class that has probably the least amount of work in any class that you have, because you're really not writing a lot of so-called papers. You're following systems. But the key thing is making sure that you cite your sources, and I read the information that you have, and then I run them through Grammarly for plagiarism. And then, of course, you already know they must be Word documents. Only a couple of you submitted them by PDF. And if you look at the instructions and the assignment itself, it is not just me saying it, the instructions say Word document as well. Okay. So now let's go back and let's look at the announcement for the week. Here we are. Prisoner rights and the evolution of probation. And the assignment requires the reading of chapters 8 and 9 of your text, as I sent the PowerPoints and the additional information to help you with the quiz and to understand the module in itself. And we're going to take a look at the law of corrections and prisoner rights, bill of rights and community supervision correction, law and prisoner right activity sentencing and sanction. And then you have your vocabulary review and evolving role of the probation officer that you will be able to look at and consider. Just remember, when you do your papers, do not cite anything that you get out of this module concerning probation officers. Do research so that you will, I want to continue to have you to do research. Discussion, intermediate sanctions, again, as I repeated before, Tuesday night, last night at 11:59 p.m. and then reply post due on Sunday. Complete the mid-quarter student survey. And then remember, as we are finishing up this course, that start strong and finish strong. And you know, my motto, adversity is a springboard to success. Let's take a quick look at the assignments. So you have a scenario here for your intermediate sanctions. And you're going to, in your initial post, explain the immediate sanction to use as a result of the violation of PAT in this particular segment, and support it, the selection detailing why you selected it, include any problems associated and any issues related to the probationer or due process rights with the sanction that you select. And then a different intermediate section as a response for your reply post. Now, on the written assignment probation officer, because I'm not going to, you got the quiz and that, so I'm not going to go over that because you already knew all about that. So let me move this. There we go. So you have a scenario given to you, and the scenario deals with a common, this is very much based on reality, overcrowding of jails and the hiring of new probation officers to provide community supervision as an alternative to jail. The probation officers who've been with this county for a few years are more to believe that their job is about surveillance. The new probation director has extensive background related to evidence-based practices and believes that the probation officer is about assisting the probationer in changing their behavior. Kind of sounds familiar with rehabilitation. As a newer hire, you understand the concept of evidence-based practices, which you're going to talk about in your paper, and the many roles that probation officers wear. And we're going to share a little bit about that tonight. And you've been asked to create a job announcement, posting that accurately describes and details the position. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to prepare a announcement that, and make sure it's double spaced, by the way, and with you'll see the rubric in a minute, that requires you to provide credible sources, and you're going to describe the probation officer duties. Describe 4 roles that the probation officer plays, including specific examples of what the probation officer is required to do in fulfilling these roles. And there are 4 listed below. As I said before, providing supporting evidence from credible sources. And then, of course, formatting in professional language, you know, grammar and spelling and stuff like that. And again, it reminds you again, save your assignment as a Word document. Tells you it right here. So I'm not just telling you that. Every week you'll notice it'll say that. All right. So now let's take a look at the rubric. See how the rubric looks. So it's due Sunday the 1st for a possible 60 points. Again, I remind you, act as if emerging competence and proficiency don't exist, but focus on satisfying the requirements in the mastery, advanced or exceeds demonstration. I haven't, by the way, if you get your grade and it's 100%, you want to know how you did, that means that what you did was you satisfied all the criteria in here. So I didn't give you any comments generally. What I usually give you comments is when there's a deficiency, I let you know. But if you get like a check mark and no comments under there, then generally that means that you satisfied the requirements. So that means if you did this and you put a check, I put a check mark and no comments under it, it means you did a very good job of the summary of the continuum of the probation officers and provided supporting credible sources. See, it doesn't say sources. Remember what you're doing, guys, when you're putting together your assignments. You're putting together something so that someone can pick up and read it that never understood anything about this, and your job is to provide them with information that will allow them to understand what you're trying to accomplish. In this case, you're seeking to hire probation officers, and you're setting out the requirements of what's expected of each candidate and making it explicitly clear, and you're providing supporting sources. All right. Then you get down, that's the summary, and then the description of each role. So you for 20 points, exemplary description of each role with thorough supporting evidences from credible sources. Do you remember how many roles they said to include? Anybody remember? Yep. So if you submit 3, then you're probably going to end up with accurate description of each role, supporting evidence, or you're going to end up with one of these minimal supporting evidence, but you'll probably end up in here generally. So you'll lose 3 points. So it's important to satisfy what each box says for it. So you got to make sure that you exemplary description of each role, of course, following the processes. And then finally, the examples of probation officers' work supporting through supporting evidence and information as well. And then, of course, the spelling and typos. That is it. Any questions? Anybody else? Any questions? Okay. Yeah. The guide that I give you is this roadmap. using the details in the module and making sure that you understand that the details in the module supported by what's in the rubric itself on the far right. So everybody's with me on uh, ignoring these first three, right? Okay. Now, someone asked me, why do you have the other three? I said, it's for the same reason you have um, B, C, D's, and F's as a grade. And this is just, so this is kind of like, this is A, this might be B, this one might be C, and then this might be D. So if you want to do D work, you're going to do this, D, and possibly F work, you're going to do this. If you're going to do C work, which it says competence, then that's what you're going to do here. If you want to do B work, then you're going to be proficient. But if you want to do A work, that's mastery. So I think that the best thing for me to do is to focus your mind on A work, so that you will be able to get those points. A lot of you recognize if you did, you get 36. If you get 36, that generally means that you're in this margin right here. But if you get 36 out of 60, that's just a little over half. So that puts you down in here. Okay, so let's uh, get this done that way. All right. So those are the assignments for the week. Let's go back. Let's talk about the topics. So you should be able to, at the end of this module, which when the end of this module comes, it's not just the lecture. The lecture gives you part of it, but your reading gives you some of it. Your PowerPoints and additional information give you the rest of it, and it fills you in. And so your reading and your PowerPoints and the additional information helps you to understand the objectives that we set out. So the course is designed each week to satisfy these objectives. And there are students that say, well, it didn't satisfy the objectives. That means you didn't do something. Maybe you didn't listen to the lecture carefully. Maybe you didn't read it. You just skimmed the material. So anyway, you should be able to discuss the foundations of corrections law, which is kind of like what you're going to be doing in your written assignment. The evolution of prisoner rights, you're going to learn about that in your reading, and then you're going to learn a little bit about that tonight before we go. And then the role of jails as part of sentencing. Explain community supervision and the continuing of intermediate sanctions. What are intermediate sanctions and that thing? You had to learn about that through the discussion forum. So all the assignments are geared towards dealing with these objectives. Again, this is the reading. So we're going to talk a little bit about this, this, and then we're going to get all this done here within the next half an hour, 40 minutes or so. So let's get going. So as you already know, or should already know, that there are 4 foundations to support the rights of people. And the highest one is called the United States Constitution, and they're made up of articles and amendments. And that is something that's very rarely added on or changed. So we're particularly focusing on prisoner rights. So usually you have due process, equal protection, clauses of the Constitution, which is the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And be aware that the other amendments that are included, like cruel and unusual punishment, the 8th Amendment, the states apply the federal equal failure to provide punishment that's not excessive by under state law by applying the 14th Amendment. Before that, way back before the 14th Amendment was written, it only applied to federal. Now it applies to federal as well as state. So you have then your statutes. That's what a lot of people call the laws of the land. And remember that the statutes are written and passed by the legislature, which on the federal level is the House and the Senate. And 435 members of the U.S. House of Representatives and 100 in the United States Senate. And then each state generally has their version to support the same, and the numbers vary as to how many members of the House and the Senate exist. And then people take issues to interpret the Constitution and the statutes themselves. And it results in what we call case law, where court decisions are issued, and those court decisions are interpreted by the judicial branch, which, by the way, let me back up. Statutes are generally enforced once they're passed by the executive branch. In this case, the executive branch in the federal level should be the president, and everybody who falls under him, agencies like the Justice Department and all the other agencies, the Department of Prisons, so forth. Anyway, so case law are the cases that are brought by individuals challenging. You'll find that in the legal rights involving corrections and prisoner rights, you'll find a bunch of what we call 1981 cases. Does anybody know what a 1981 case has to do with? Or where the term 1981 comes from? Okay. 1981, there's what we call the United States Code. Each state has state statutes. The federal statutes are in what we call the USC, United States Code. Section 1981 of the United States Code is where you'll see a lot of suits that are filed on behalf of individuals whose rights may be considered violated, and they are litigated. And when you read a lot of prisoner cases, you will run across that term, 1981. It is not the year, it is the section of the law that is interpreted by the courts in cases. That's all it is. Everybody got it? So if you hear 1981, or they'll throw another number out, then they will be talking about that. On the next level is what we call administrative. These are quasi-court cases where there are actually administrative hearings that take place, maybe with the Department of Corrections or some of those. But these are regulations where, here's the deal. Also, there are statutes or rules set out to try to protect the rights of inmates, and also to protect the rights of the people who work there as well. So these are regulations. Now, usually regulations are, you might hear the term, exhaust administrative remedies. And that will apply a lot of times in prisoners bringing lawsuits. And the reason for that is because prisoners will bring 1981 lawsuits to say that we are a certain belief, and in order to have our beliefs satisfied, we have to have steak. We don't eat chicken, we don't eat pork, we don't eat fish. So that would be something that would be argued on a regulatory basis, and then if they're not satisfied, then they can appeal to the courts, and then the courts will usually decide by interpreting the regulation that's involved and the statute that the regulation came out of to determine whether or not it's valid or not. So regulations are there. They keep everything operating. And it tells you under here, I've kind of already described these, but regulations, rules made by federal, state, and local administrative agencies set for the executive branch, back to what I was talking about earlier, designed to implement the policies of the agency itself. All right. And then the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. And it talks about how originally that the courts didn't intervene much in correction processes, and that they left it to the laws of the individual states and to the judges. But some states, as it says, use their constitution to correct abuses in jails, prisons, and others followed by the belief that incarcerated individuals forfeited all legal rights. One of the rights that is open for debate in many jurisdictions, which is very important at the present time, is what? Anybody can have an idea about what I'm thinking of? And it's being debated. What is that right? The right to do what? What's going on right now that's big news? Well, yeah, but that's ongoing. What is really big right now? It's in the news every day. No, they don't have a right to COVID-19. I mean, that has to do with, no, there's a right that prisoners have that's being debated state by state. There we go. Thank you, Daniel. It's the right to vote. Right to vote. And if you pay close attention very carefully, in jurisdictions now, there are some now that allow individuals who are in correction facilities, even though they're prisoners, um, to have a right to vote, because the theory is that they are controlled in terms of their rights by the government, and they have the opportunity to select who's in the executive branch. They don't select who's in the judicial branch, of course, because you know U.S. Supreme Court, which is another topic which you have to take my constitutional law class so that I talk about that. But the legislatures, Congress and the House, as well as their various state legislatures, debating the rights of an individual having a fundamental right to vote. It's already been given in many jurisdictions right here for individuals who are awaiting trial who are in jail as opposed to prison. But we're dealing with today pretty much prison. But the same can apply, so that individuals, before they are convicted and awaiting trial, regardless of what they're charged with, should still have their right, because they are presumed innocent until proven guilty. And so then jurisdictions determine whether or not they're going to give individuals that right. That's a powerful thing, to have your vote taken away. Do you realize that? All you realize that? Yeah. And the question is, just because you commit a crime, are you still, yeah, there you go. It's exactly what it does. Takes away your voice, your capacity to speak out. The point of the matter is that that's why I always tell people, go vote or shut up, one or the other. And that's it. That's a very real thing. People died for it. And I'm, as an African American, I personally make sure that people understand the importance and role of it. So anyway, the point of the matter is that women, hey, that's a very good point. Women and minorities have fought for it. But yeah, women, yeah, it kind of like blows your mind when you stop and think that there was a time when women couldn't vote and only the men. I mean, just like, you know, that's that's kind of like, wow, but that particular thing, thank God we fixed that. So anyway, just quickly going down here, um, they'll talk about each of these sections of the Constitution have been litigated, and various ones. I'm not going to go over all of them, but under the First Amendment from 62 to 2006. Now, believe me, there are more than these that you see here. These are just a few of them. Under the Fourth Amendment, in the Fourth Amendment, if those you understand criminal law itself, it is one of the most prevalent amendments, one of the most used amendments in the Constitution, because it deals actually with the privacy of individuals. And so the Fourth Amendment right deals with cell checks, visitor stuff, and you see all of that under here. Strip searches, and those kinds of things. Those are usually the big issues that involve the Fourth Amendment. The Eighth Amendment, making sure that the facilities are humane as opposed to inhumane. And also going back to what someone said earlier, um, dealing with COVID-19. That's a right under the Eighth Amendment that is very, very, very seriously. So you shouldn't be neglected um, just because you're incarcerated, committed a crime, because that would be a violation of the Eighth Amendment. You should have as much help you as anybody who's never committed a crime for COVID-19 or any illness. And so then, if you pay attention to these decisions, most of these have to do with the conditions of the prison itself. Okay. The 14th Amendment deals with how the jails are set up, and the question about equal protection of these laws, and how individuals are treated. Are they treated equally regardless of race, creed, sex, national origin? And so these cases under here from 68 to 95 deal with segregation, and it deals with issues of due process. That is, you have a right to a hearing and to face your accusers before a decision is made, finally relating to an area. And in some instances, like in 76, although due process is accorded, an individual has no right to counsel in a disciplinary hearing. Well, that's kind of changing. That's evolving because depends on the extent of the disciplinary activity. The more intrusive it is to the individual, the more likely then you are going to have a right to counsel. You got to also remember that you can catch a case. When I say that, that's a term of art that we use in the business, which means that if you're sentenced for a crime and you do something while incarcerated, you of course could be charged with another crime. Well, in that case, it's not just a disciplinary hearing, it's a case that would end up before the courts. Therefore, you of course, under the Constitution, Sixth Amendment right to counsel and the right to a fair trial and all those different kind of things. So a lot of disciplinary hearings are dealt with on the administrative level that we talked about earlier. Involuntary transfer to a mental hospital, same thing, requires a hearing to determine whether or not it's necessary. And then you have, obviously in this case, it's important for you to have counsel, because if you're not mentally capable of doing something that would cause that move, then someone has to speak on your behalf, and that's generally your counsel. And then here in 95, and again, this is all evolving. Prison regulations do not violate due process unless they place a significant hardship on the resident. So it looks like that person's being picked out to be picked on. That's what it pretty much means. So these are just some. These are not all of them. Okay. And as you read this little line here by the late Justice Scalia, United States Supreme Court Justice, he said, "It is always true of probationers as it is true of parolees that they don't enjoy the absolute liberty to which every citizen is entitled, but only conditional liberty properly dependent on the observation of special restrictions." And so that gets to things like voting, not religion, but, and it shouldn't, and housing to an extent, but primarily it deals with things like voting rights and things of the nature that we had talked about earlier. Those are just a few things when it comes to dealing with the law of corrections and prison rights. Moving right along, dealing with how the Bill of Rights and community supervision. These are cases that go back to 1987 that deal with things that we've already talked about, like warrantless search. The resident was reasonable within the Fourth Amendment. Remember, that's the search and seizure, because it was conducted pursuant to a regulation and had a reasonable response to the special needs of the probation system. Pennsylvania Board of Probation and Parole versus Scott. Evidence that could be barred by the exclusionary rule. Now, exclusionary rule is a rule that if you try to use evidence that was illegally obtained, that is, violated the Fourth Amendment as the constitutional right, as interpreted by a court in a court case, then you could not use that evidence in a criminal case against an individual, because it violates their constitutional rights. But it says here that evidence that could be barred from exclusionary rule from the use of a prosecution in a criminal trial, it can be used in a parole revocation. And the reason is because in the criminal case, you are determined to be innocent until proven guilty, and or the fact that you are under a different standard. In the criminal court, it must be determined beyond a reasonable doubt that you did something. But in a civil matter or a quasi-criminal matter, you use um, the reasonable belief. Reasonable belief. What am I talking about? You use the as we call it. I'll give it to you in this sense so you'll get it. You could be half wrong and then you lose. So very important. So preponderance of evidence is technically what it's called, but a lot of people, excuse me, the students don't understand that part. But all it means is 51% of the proof is that you did something, and that gives enough. In a criminal case, it has to be 100%. All right. So exclusionary rule information that's not legally obtained can still be used in a parole or a probation hearing. In Memphis versus Ray, a probationer has the right to counsel in revocation since before, and that's what I was talking about earlier. I said it's ever evolving about depending on the extent of the issue that the individual is dealing with, whether or not they have the right to counsel. So if you reach the stage where the person is going to suffer some jeopardy or be deprived of life, liberty, or the pursuit of happiness under the 14th Amendment, then in that case, then counsel should be given to that individual before a sentence is imposed, because it's going to involve additional incarceration. Morrissey versus Brewer. Oh, I remember studying this in college in my constitutional law class, as well as in law school. And so basically what this does is it sets out the standards for due process hearings. The officer determines if there's probable cause that a violation occurred, and the parolee or probationer, but in this case, parolee, has the right to be notified of charges against them. And this is basic due process. Know the evidence, speak on their own behalf, present witnesses, and confront the witnesses against them. At the revocation hearing, the parolee must receive notice of the charges and the evidence so that they can prepare a defense. That's basically what it amounts to. Another case I'm very familiar with is extending the parolee rights to probationers that we talked about in Morrissey versus Brewer. So when I said that what I was talking about, the rights apply to probation, at the time that Morrissey versus Brewer, it did not. But then it took, notice the year 72, the very next year, they said, oh, we got to fix this for probationers too. So someone brought a case, and the case said the decision of Morrissey versus Brewer should also apply to individuals who have their probation violated. Okay, and that's really what happened there. And then the last one is the infamous Cooper versus Pate. You will almost see this. See now, there's another section. See 1983. So section 1983, just like I said, 1981. And these suits, 81 usually and 83 are the big ones that you'll see. But it means for the incarcerated individual to bring lawsuits against correction officials for doing things to them. Applies not only to incarcerated, for those on probation and parole. So these are cases that were established to be able to, for the inmates to be able to speak out, like violation of religion, or maybe say, hey, we're not getting the proper health treatment, and that we're dying in large numbers. It's kind of hard for us to shelter in place, obviously, because maybe you have a roommate, or either you might be in an overcrowded facility, as that's probably a good chance in the case as we shared earlier. So you want to have some protection given to you. So those are just a few of the rights. dealing with correction law and prisoner right activities, you look at, excuse me. So if you look at, there's a quiz that helps you to understand correction law and the prisoner right activities. And so what you'll do is, let's just do this one right here. So I want you to tell me, which of these is the First Amendment? The first, second, third, or fourth? Okay. Which is the Fourth Amendment? Well, I tell you earlier, you said the Fourth Amendment is the first one. Is that what you said? Okay. Thank you. You scared me for a minute. Remember I talked about search and seizure? Yes, privacy. The next two. 14th Amendment. This is the last one. You said the 14th Amendment is this one right here that I'm highlighting? Anybody else? Relates to bail and cruel and unusual punishment. Who said the 8th Amendment? And then all the U.S. Constitutional applies to all citizens as equal protection, basically. Let's see if you're right. Yep. So it tells you you're correct, and then you continue. So then you go to the next group, and you know, I'm gonna do these real quick. Which one has to do with Gagnon versus Scarapelli? Which one? I just talked about it. The first one has to do with Gagnon versus Scarapelli. Warrantless searches of a cell. How about this one? Remember I said that Morrissey versus Brewer gave parolees the rights to due process, confronting witness, and then a year later, in this case, remember that? I just said that a few minutes ago. Okay. Strip search, including body cavities, may be carried out after contact visits when the need for such searches outweigh the personal rights invaded. Is that a Fourth Amendment 72 or Fourth Amendment 79? That's from your reading, by the way. And it's in the PowerPoint. Is that a newer case or an older case? Let's see where we at. Yep. See, so the strip search came later. and the warrantless search of a cell came first. That's it. So those are the things that you can go over, and they will help you in terms of preparing. We got 5 more minutes, and we're actually on schedule. So you can go through those yourself. And then finally, dealing with sentences and sanctions. And sentencing and sanctions go all the way from things that deal with helping you to understand the uh, um, the seriousness of the offense, starting with paying some fines. Okay, community service work. Community service work is one of the great intermediary sanctions, and I commented about this in the discussion post because you don't get paid for it, but what you do is it helps you to become sensitive to the issue that you may have been involved with. Like then drug and alcohol treatment. This is a necessity. Education and programs to help individuals. I have always said many times to my students that drug and alcohol treatment is treating an illness, just like COVID-19 or the flu. But these are sanctions that are necessary to keep you from becoming a repeat offender or recidivist. Day reporting centers, this gives you a chance to get more involved into the community, and it shows things that go with it. Drug control, use of chemicals to control, um, um, such as dealing with the mental control of individuals, where you actually put them under drugs to keep them focused on not violating the law, whether a sex offender or alcohol abuse or they're depressed or so forth. Home confinement speaks for itself. It allows you to be at home and in jail at the same time. Shock incarceration. Now, it does not mean that they electrically fried you. That would be a violation of the 8th Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment. But you're sentenced to jail or prison, but after a period of being there, the judge will reduce the sentence. And the reason is because there's an assumption that jail is distasteful and the person will be motivated to maintain law-abiding or probation compliant. What that means is that you learned your lesson. Well, the other thing is that you should be aware of, and we talk about this a lot in corrections, is that individuals, the longer they're incarcerated, the more likely that they will be committing crimes, because people learn how to be good criminals in jail or in prison, because when you're incarcerated, you're exposed to individuals. Sometimes you may not even be guilty of it later on, but you also may have committed a minor offense, and you'll be subjected to lifers, individuals who be there a long time and they have adapted to the prison or jail life to survive, and you will start to pick that up as a habit. So the shorter the period, the easier it is to get you to return back to reintegrate into society. You know about that term. Boot camp is like basically making a person act as if they were in the military, and they have to get up early in the morning, marches, hard labor. So it's developed to deal with discipline and respect for authority. And so these are just some of them, so you know about that for your assignments. And then the evolution of the probation officer, you're going to discover by going through these that the probation officer reached a stage where it's you're like a police officer, but you're also like a counselor. You're going to involve in various philosophies like restorative justice, evidence-based practices. And the point of matter is that there's an overview of the changes here, and I'll just go through them real quick. These are some of the duties that started out in 1980. Pay attention to what they have here: pre-sentence investigations, and these are all completed by the probation officer, parole officers. Then they added by 96. If you pay close attention, you'll see that it becomes like social working. By 2009, these are added to it. And today, these are the things here. So the probation officer today is, as it's called it, a change agent. And not only for enhancing the public safety, but for helping the offender to get their skills and abilities so they stay out of the system. You cannot be a probation officer in most jurisdictions. Matter of fact, I don't know of any without a bachelor's degree. You cannot. I repeat, you cannot. If you know of any that you can, let me know about that. I'd be interested in taking a look at that. But because of the fact that individuals are almost like they're social workers, and that's it. So there's some clues for things to help you. Remember, I said do not cite them in your paper from this. Just do some research on it. You can use those as starting points, though. Okay. And then finally, the vocabulary review. I'm not going to go over that, but I'll just show you how to do it. You click on this and opens up just like the other thing that we did a few minutes ago, and it gives you a little practice, little quiz there, and you go through and you do the same thing as before. Match the items, you know. So that's the answer to this. Non-interference, hands off, and then this is this. So you print that, those are correct. So you're gonna put those together. So again, little exercises that can help you to be prepared for the quiz. Okay. And that does it for today. Any questions? Whoops, I knocked out a class. Let's go back to this. Any questions? Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I am going to give you the key phrase for tonight. Very important topic. Probation officer. That's it. Give me that, and you get your points. So I will see you next week, the 4th of November. Do make sure that you, if you haven't done so already, to get out and vote. Very important thing. We already talked about that a little bit tonight. Vote your conscience and decide, who you think is the best to carry on this country for the next 4 years. And good. Many people did. A great number have. And I don't tell people who to vote for. I'll tell them who I voted for. I voted for nobody because I haven't voted yet. I vote actually on election day. I'm one of those people who wait until the day. But I'm gonna just tell you, if I have a mask that I wear that I posted on Facebook, I have a t-shirt and cap. it says Biden Harris, because I'm very disturbed about things that are happening in our country at the present time, from racial issues to health issues to um, just I was raised up not to call people names and stuff. I just don't. That's me now, and it's not representative of the school. It's representative of Professor Richard Wright and who he is. I don't hold that against anybody, because that's the beautiful part about this country. I have friends who are Trump supporters, um, but we refrain from getting deep into it and so forth and so on. But anyway, the bottom line is get out and vote, because if you don't vote, you have nothing to say about it. But yes, exercise that right. Very, very important. So I'll see you guys next week. We'll see who's in, or at least who's leading at this time. In the meantime, if you need me, you know how to reach me. I wish you guys very, very, very important, regardless of whether you believe it or not. I wear a mask. I believe I'm 70. I'm African American. I'm in the high risk group. I am going to be wise about it for my self-protection and my family. Each person can make their own choice, but stay safe out there, whatever you do. Very, very important. I've already had a few students who got caught with this. One family, it almost wiped out the whole household of one of my students, 7 of them. So it's pretty devastating. You can't see it, but it's right there. So, all right, guys, have a good evening, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Good night.